evening, everyone. It's gone 6 o'clock, so I will declare the FPOL meeting open. First, I'd like to acknowledge the Whadjuk people as the traditional owners of this land and recognise their ongoing connection with Fremantle or Walyalup, and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still important today. In terms of attendance, apologies and leave of absence, we have apologies from both Councillor Archibald and also Councillor Thompson. Any leave of absence? Nope. Disclosure of interest by members? Nope. Response to previous questions, there are none, and so that brings us to public question time, and we have one or possibly two people speaking, Richard and Alison Everson, sorry. So if you'd just like to come to the front, are you both talking or is it just one? Okay, thank you. And you have 3 minutes.
Evening, everybody. I have pre-prepared, and it is 3 minutes. We would like to thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk in support of the Greening Fremantle strategy and how it affects Samson, the gateway to Fremantle. We are here representing the opinions of Samson Precinct Group and residents of Samson. We are fully supportive of the proposal and planting the verges through Samson. The Precinct Group first requested that Council consider beautifying the entrance of Samson in February 2019. So we'll be pretty happy to see the project get underway. Residents have felt that Samson is regarded by Council as the last and forgotten suburb. The junction to South Street and Macomb Avenue has become a major cut through for traffic to Winterfold Road, especially since the introduction of the traffic lights and the upgrading of the road surfaces. With Council now adopting the Greening Fremantle strategy, this is the right time to make the statement for the greening for the gateway to Fremantle, starting at Samson. As part of the up-and-coming budget discussions, we urge the Council to support the greening plan and in particular the vegetation at the intersection of Macomb Avenue and South Street. You will be aware that Council data shows that Samson experiences the highest temperatures of all Fremantle suburbs, and with expected climate change, actions taken today will help address some of these increases and make Samson a more livable suburb. We also ask that the works start at Samson rather than being left to the end. As part of the strategy planned to plant natives on both sides of the junction, we would like to request that this includes a way to screen the large and imposing junction box. We have seen other boxes painted to disguise them or screened with plants or fencing. As Samson is the gateway to Fremantle, we would also like the plan to include a Samson neighbourhood entrance sign on either side of Macomb Avenue. We believe that the green linkage objectives in the strategy, along with the beautification of the entrance, will encourage people to utilise the connection corridor through to Samson Park and beyond. The Precinct Group would like to acknowledge the support of Ryan Abbott, Frank Moughlin in liaising with us on this project and aligning synergies. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. So that moves us on to petitions. Does anybody have a petition? No. Deputations, special presentations or presentations, there are none. Confirmation of minutes. So I move that the Finance Policy, Operation and Legislation Committee confirm the minutes dated 9th of February 2022. All those in favour? Oh, so need a seconder, sorry. Councillor Moughlin, thank you. And all those in favour? Those, yeah, oh, that's unanimous. Excellent. Elected member communication. Councillor Moughlin.
Thank you. And just before Richard and Alison leave, I just wanted to say thank you to Richard and Alison on behalf of as the representatives of the Samson precinct, and just as some additional context to Richard's statement earlier, and the group were hoping to be able to come to a full council meeting, but timing didn't allow them to do so. So thank you for taking the time to come to the FPOL meeting, and I will urge other councillors, elected members, to now have a look at the live stream to understand what Richard was referring to. But in essence, the group have been pursuing with Ryan and his team a plan to look at the improvement of Macomb Avenue and South Street. And if you do spend any time coming down South Street there, it is essentially a piece of dirt at that entrance, which is both the entrance to Fremantle and the entrance to Samson. And particularly the precinct group have done a great job to understand the strategies that the city has, and particularly the greening strategy, and understood the work to develop the green corridors, particularly through Samson, and making sure that this work here is linking up with that strategy. So I just want to say thanks for that, and really urge as we go through the budget process for us to consider how we manage that potential project and the opportunities that come with it. Thank you. And then, thank you. And just secondly as well, thinking as well from a local government perspective, on the east coast of Australia at the moment, there are a lot of local governments who are bearing the brunt of the floods. Thank you, Charlie. The floods which are occurring at the moment and/or have occurred. So really, I don't think there's too much we can do as such, but to express that sentiment that our thoughts are with those local governments and their communities, and the difficulty that they're facing at the moment, and the work that they're doing that they will be doing to recover from such significant events.
Well, thank you, Councillor Moughlin. Any other elected member communication? No? Okay, then I'll move to the items, committee items firstly. Do elected members want to call on the ones that they want to speak on, so we can move the others on block? So obviously the draft parking plan, item 7. Does anybody want to speak on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6? Councillor Vucic? 3? Yeah, we're not to add that one yet, but noted. So 5 and 6, or well, 4, 5 and 6? All right. Okay, so I'll move item 1 and 2 on block. Can I have a seconder? The Mayor. All those in favour? That's unanimous. So I'll move item 3, which is the draft annual financial statements. Is there a seconder? Councillor Moughlin. And Councillor Vucic, you wanted to speak on that one?
Do that? Okay. I just want to outline why it's very difficult for me to be able to support the officer's recommendations. And I've got a copy to leave after I've read it out. I look at the agenda item 14 to 20, and I think it's pretty difficult to understand it and then contextualise it in following through a lot of the information presented. So what I'd like to just point out this evening is meeting documents. I'm referring to the meeting documents now that support the agenda. I'm using the page number to the right of the document. We have a look at page 2 of 77, which refers to an independent auditor's report, or the draft independent auditor's report. And, you know, it tells you which page it should be on. When you go to that page, there is no report. There's a blank page, but there are 2 financial ratios on page 67 and 69. Now, I can't find the draft independent auditor's report. I assume the blank page is where the draft report should have been located. The draft report is important because it provides context for the interpretation of the information contained in the draft annual financial statements. It's really important because these documents connect and link in with each other. Without the draft report, I'm left to draw conclusions which may be incorrect or misleading, and this is not helpful for me. One can be mischievous and draw conclusions that the information perhaps is being held back for some sort of reason. So I've dealt with that little block as I have stated. Then I go through one I really would like to ask a question on, and that is on page 4577, elected member remuneration. The ratepayers have paid out $570,967 for elected members' remuneration for up till June 30th, 2021. And yet, when you have a look at that document, it just says Mayor and councillors 1 to 16. They're not identified. Can I ask why we chose to do that?
I'll throw to the director.
Through the chair, with regards to the auditor's report, these are the draft financial statements. We're still awaiting the final auditor's report, which will be provided when we put it up for adoption. So that's why that's missing. With regard to the elected member remuneration question, we are just noting this information at the moment for your information. We're not actually adopting it, so I'll take that question on notice and come back to you with some more information on that.
Okay, thank you. I really don't. I know that they're draft annual financial statements, but if I'm going to go through these financial statements and make sense out of them, I do expect to find a document that's listed in the index inside. I go through and I've made another 2 or 3 other comments, which I'd like some explanations and questions. So I'd like to hand that up. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm understanding that you're providing them on notice to be answered in email rather than here. Okay, thank you. That's very helpful, just because giving prior warning of complicated questions is useful if you want a meaningful answer on the spot. So thank you. So anything else on that item? Councillor Mofflin.
Yeah, just briefly, I suppose I was going to make the point that at this point in time, we're only noting that these are draft financial statements and that the audit is still to be finalised, and that's the officer's recommendation this evening, and I look forward to seeing the auditor's report and outcome from there. But to put it on the record and expressing disappointment that we are sitting in 9th of March and we haven't got a completed audit report. I understand a number of reasons behind that, both on the auditor's side and some internal backwards and forwards as well, and would like to think that come next round for the audit that we're well prepared and we can see a finalised report, if you like, within the sort of 6-month period as much as possible before the end of the year. But I just want to also say thank you to staff for putting up the draft financial statements prior to the audit being completed. I think it's good to provide that clarity and detail prior to the final report being dropped and needing to be endorsed. So it gives people the opportunity to have a look at that. So thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Vucic, can you please turn your microphone off? And also just note that we are required to wear masks when not talking. So, and yeah, properly. Thank you. So if there's nothing further on that item, I will move the officer's recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Sorry, have? Okay, awesome. Thank you for debate, of course. All those in favour? Those opposed? Councillor Vucic opposed. Item 4, sole source supply for the Aboriginal Arts Foundation. Yes. Okay, so yes, just to explain, that will go through to council because we don't have delegated authority if we don't all vote in favour tonight because a couple of people are missing. So just to explain. So item 4, I'll move the officer's recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Mayor Fitzharding. Councillor Vucic, you wanted to speak to this?
I just want to question is, it's a sole source of supply. Is there any reason why this type of activity does not go out to tender?
I'll refer to the director, sorry.
Through the chair, this is going through sole source of supply simply because there's no other supplier of this product. Darwin is the only supplier that's designed such a product that you can deliver and market online for artists. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Thank you.
Was there anything, Councillor Vucic, can you turn your microphone off? Was there anything further on this item? Mayor Fitzharding.
I just wanted to acknowledge the work that the team have put into this. There are obviously we do like to have a competitive process, but I think to actually go through and identify such a specific and unique product to meet this need in the short time frame, so we can use the funding that we receive from the department in a way that is appropriate in a COVID environment. I think you did a really great job of explaining that in the report, why we would go this direction. So thank you.
Indeed. So I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's unanimous. And I'll move to item 5, which is the other sole source supplier. I'll move that. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Moughlin. And Councillor Vucic, you wanted to speak to this?
More of a question. Being a sole source of supply, particularly in the next item, I would have liked more information as to why we need to only have the one source supply. What is it that they provide that no one else in the 21st century supplies? I'm always a little bit dubious when I commit ratepayers' money and I have, this is the only option we have. Is it because we didn't go out to see other options, or, there is, we've already got relationships? I just get nervous. I just like some reassurance as to why we only have the one supply, sole source of supply.
I'll hand over to the director. Thank you.
Through the chair. So when we implement a software solution, sort of enterprise-wide, it's a significant project, and we expend significant resources to implement it. The way it usually works is you enter into a contract to deliver the software as a service over time. I guess the option is when you come to the end of that contract, you have to go back out to market and look at reintegrating an entire new system. But once you are signed into a platform, it does become the sole source of supply because it's simply just a contract renewal for that particular supplier.
Yeah, and the CEO will add something.
Just through the chair, we're going to continue to use both of those products. So we're going to continue to use Esri as our GIS application software, and we're going to continue to use Tech1 as our proprietary software. As with all software companies, there's usually only one company that will support a product at a time. In this particular case, both of those products are proprietary software monitored by only one organisation. So to continue to get support in maintaining that product, we need to pretty much use the company that develops it, which is why we consider them to be sole source.
Thank you.
Any further? Does anyone want to speak? No, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Item 6, I'll move the officer's recommendation. Now, can I have a seconder? Councillor Kamada. And Councillor Vucic, do you want to speak to this?
Answered my question from the previous item. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's unanimous. So now we go to item 7, the draft parking plan principles. I'll move the officer's recommendation as stated, but note that there is an amendment. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Moughlin, thank you. And who wants to start the conversation? Councillor Moughlin?
All right, I'll start. noting that I don't know if this will be the best foot to kick off on if I'm going to add too much. But yeah, appreciate the work that's gone into putting the plan principles together. I suppose I struggled a little bit to actually visualize what the plan principles would mean and what would that look like on the ground. Um, that might just be my own um, inability to make that connection. But yeah, it would have been, and I suppose looking forward to the actual plan itself to understand that detail. The principles are there, but for me, I just couldn't make that connection to say, okay, well, this is what parking is going to look like in Fremantle under this plan, and this is what people can experience as a difference or otherwise or not as part of that. Not to say, I'll support this as it goes forward and look to see the plan when it comes through.
Thank you. The director may respond.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Councillor Moulton makes a very fair point. By way of explanation, as the report sets out, this has been approached as a two-step process. The officer's thinking in that bringing a very comprehensive plan to council all in one go when some of the principles that guide a lot of the detail haven't been tested with council first would probably not be the best way of doing it. And that's why we adopted this two-stage approach, but I do acknowledge it means that the principles in isolation might seem a little bit nebulous in some ways. I think the intent is that to achieve what Councillor Moughlin looking for, the second stage of the process, where for each of the precincts that's been identified, the principles then get used to kind of shape what the parking looks like in a particular precinct, and it will be different from one precinct to another, is hopefully where Councillor Moughlin will get to see what he's wishing to see, quite understandably. And certainly we'll take that point on board and try and make sure that when the plan is fully developed for each of the precincts, it does give that local contextual feel to what those principles mean on the ground in a particular area.
Thank you. And the CEO will respond also.
Thank you, through the chair. I think the two main things coming out of these principles that probably change our current approach to parking are items 1.6 and 1.7, which talk about the 85% rule, which is obviously how the principal approach will take to our off-street parking now. And also item 1.8, which talks about in a predominantly residential zone where residential parking permits are provided, we'll try and provide the restriction on parking that allows for an ability to keep parking within a 200-metre of a residence. Yep. So that at the moment we probably don't really account for that so much. We sort of historically rate how we restrict parking, but this is saying that we'll try and maintain a 200-metre walking distance for residents parking, so they don't have to walk too far. And I think it also makes comment to the fact that an ideal would be to get down to 100 metres if we could, and that maybe we'll review that as part of the process as well.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question, and it does relate to the amendment that I have put forward, but whether or not it's even required, because just noting that the precinct, this is about a set of policies that aim for those objectives within these different precincts. I presume that paid parking is going to be one of the levers that will be considered in all of this. So does that mean paid parking is potentially going to be looked at for these precincts as part of these principles that you've already drafted?
Through you, Chair, yes, paid parking could well be one of the policy levers that would be used in particular precincts when that detailed work's done, to see what's the most appropriate mechanism to use in a particular locality to manage that kind of competing demand between different users of what parking facilities are available, or to just overall regulation of supply and demand. Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Vucic.
Look, I think it's a good plan, and but I think we also need to note that one size fits all. We need to be careful about that, particularly in South Fremantle. I've had a lot of feedback from residents, particularly with the increasingly more approvals for small bars. It's at a tipping point for the residents, and I think the residential parking in Commercial Street, I can well see why Harbour Street would want to have the same. It's the same street, the same congestion, and I do think that we need to be also very mindful that in South Fremantle we're at a tipping point with the small businesses coming in, but also there are small businesses like the hairdressers. I know last year we had an issue over parking. For them to have 2 parking bays outside their businesses which are not timed and where you don't pay is going to affect that business. So I think we need to be very mindful of the nuances as we go into the various parts of our city. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else want to speak to that item? Councillor Sullivan, sir.
Thank you. I had a number of matters that I thought would be relevant to raise. And I'm assuming that this is a citywide parking policy. It's not to the exclusion of the city centre. So I guess that's the sort of first question, that is, it's meant to set principles that apply to the city centre as well as all the other centres and other areas. And on that basis, I'm intrigued by the fact that the principles don't sort of talk to issues relating to the benefit of on-street parking or the benefit of off-street parking, where it's located, peripheral, those sort of things, and even talking to the sense of prioritising other activities that might have higher priorities over the actual provision of parking. So we know, for example, increasingly we want to give over road space more and more to pedestrians first, cyclists second, and et cetera, and the car increasingly is a little bit further down the list. So those sort of principles that might come into play. It also doesn't seem to cover well what the different levers are and why you use levers in the first place. So the notion that we, and it's the hardest thing to explain to any member of the public, why do we have paid parking? Why do we have time parking? Why do we have 15 minutes and 30 minutes and 2 hours, et cetera, et cetera? And in a sense, those things which officers kind of take for granted, but are really hard to explain to members of the public, kind of feel like they need to be sort of up there in principles, so that when we try and sell a parking policy or modify what it's like in any particular area, that we can simply refer to a set of principles that say, this is why you use levers, and this is why you use a different type of lever. Why do we have a half-hour or 15-minute parking spot in High Street and 2-hour paid parking in the side streets, for example? And there's reasons for it, but they're not articulated well for public digestion and even council digestion. I also felt the notion that 100 metres or 200 metres or 400 metres might be a reasonable distance to park your car because you can't get a park in front of your own house is not the only measure of whether that is satisfactory to a resident. In some situations, in very small streets, particularly say streets between Marine Terrace and South Terrace, which might only be, I think, like 120 metres long or whatever. If you have to park around the corner in South Terrace or Marine Terrace, you go, I don't trust my car being left overnight in those streets. So whether it's 400 metres or 100 metres, sometimes it just doesn't feel right. So there are sort of measures, there are thresholds, I think, that can't just be used as a single lineal measurement to say whether or not a resident feels like that's reasonable or not. So I just wonder whether that couldn't be somehow expanded, because if I was a South Ward resident, I lived in any of the side streets coming off. Well, I am a South Ward resident, but if you live in any of the streets coming off South Terrace, and you rely on street parking, which I know I do, then I would look at that and say that's just unreasonable. So I just do question that as a principle. I guess I still feel when I read it, again, it just feels like it's not answering the questions that I know that my community are constantly raising as to, do those set of principles or guidelines give me the answers to the increasing community questions that are coming. I'm not sure they actually do. The other one is which is Councillor Busick rightly raised in a sense, is planning has a role to play, and we have previously as a council talked about whether or not cash in lieu should be an issue in the suburbs, not necessarily the city centre, or and as the planners continually tell us, we can't even apply it unless we have a parking strategy for a particular area and the like. So those are all bodies of work that kind of feel like they still need doing. And I know it's not easy, but it's also a really critical area, and it's an area that community have a lot to say, rightfully, about these matters. So I'll put that in the mix, and yeah.
Mayor Fitzharding.
It just strikes me, we do have committee delegation on this item, but it's one that's likely to have broad appeal across the elected member body, I would have thought. So I'm just wondering whether we would look to send this through to council, and if there'd be any impact if we were to do that. Just do think,
Any feedback from the officers on that?
Glenn's shaking his head.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. If you want to do that afterwards.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. I'll speak to that if there's nobody else wanting to speak. So I do agree that this is a really complicated one, and picking up on some of what Councillor Sullivan was saying there as well. I mean, I think one of the really significant elements of this is a cultural shift that kind of needs to happen, and the story of kind of parking a car around the corner and feeling uncomfortable with that. I think that's a pretty uniquely Australian feeling and experience, and if you were in London or major cities in the US or something, that's something that's not abnormal, but it's not something comfortable here. We need that cultural shift. I also started to think a little bit about what's lacking in these principles made. There's no reference here to urban design and the kind of public amenity of the environments and how parking does and doesn't impact on that. And I'm just sort of thinking everything from kind of this concept of putting parking on the fringe of the CBD and then a walkable core, and not encouraging cars to come in and try and find parking in certain areas and that sort of thing. So I had a thought about a alternative amendment that kind of picks up on the one that I flagged, but it's much more simple, and it's actually about just adding some hopeful clarity to these principles as printed. So my proposed amendment is to item 1.5, and the suggestion I have is to simply add a few words at the end of that after parking precinct, so that it reads parking precinct, which may include paid parking and urban design. And just making sure it's clear that those two elements are two elements that will be considered in these precinct approaches. Can I have a seconder for that? The Mayor, thank you. Oh, Councillor Moughlin, sorry.
No, you're right. I was just going to ask the question, does the inclusion of only those two aspects mean that others are excluded. So I just don't want to make sure that we end up that we only put in 2, and that then means that 4 or 5 other important elements are excluded, and or is there the need to put in that 2 too?
Okay, yeah, that's a good idea. Well, the CEO's just suggested we could say which may include but is not limited to paid parking in urban realm.
Yep.
Yeah, or urban design. Because you're right. I mean, things like trees and canopy cover and all that kind of stuff come into it. Thank you. Anybody else want to speak on the amendment? No? Oh, Councillor Sutherland.
I'll certainly flag that the notion of spreading paid parking even further out is something that not only is going to create a lot of pushback, I think, from community. So I'm not sure there's a well argued case for even putting it out into community. I mean, if you've got a well argued case, then community is going to want to see it. It's certainly going to demand to see it. But there is also a notion. I've read a number of reports that actually say, actually talk about the fact that paid parking is part of the problem, is actually part of a cycle that we actually have to wean ourselves off if we actually want to achieve all of the other sustainability aspects as well. So, and that's sort of that's a little bit counterintuitive, perhaps, but it certainly was when I first read it. But reading through it, it does sort of make some sense. So, and it's part of that issue of, do we really just keep trying to provide huge amounts of parking, or should we just actually stop doing that and provide less and not worry about it? Actually just not charge for it, not worry about it. Maybe just have time limits, but not necessarily paid parking. I mean, obviously that's a huge change, and it would be something that could only happen over time. But there are experts who are suggesting that's exactly the direction we should be going.
Any further comment on the amendment? Okay, I'll just close and say I have real agreement with the direction that Councillor Sullivan just said, but I do think that that's a totally different set of principles than what we're looking at here in lots of ways. And yeah, for me, it's just around not necessarily a definite introduction of paid parking in other areas, but just looking at the levers. And part of the levers are about like equalising with the CBD, but also managing the demand and so on. So that is my thinking. So I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? That's unanimous. And the item as a whole. Mayor Fitzharding. Oh. No, I think so. Excellent. So no further comment on the amended item. Councillor Vucic.
Could we vote on 1 and 2 separately?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
So number 2 being the Harbour Road and Orient Street. Okay, no problem. So I'll put part 1. All those in favour? And part 2. All those in favour? Those opposed? Yeah, excellent. All right.
And can I move to send that to full council?
Yeah, and I'm happy to second that. So we'll have another crack at it. So I'll move on to item 8, which is the bus review. I will move the officer's recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Kamada. And I'll open debate.
So I flagged in an email that I'd be looking to move an amendment to delete the reintroduction of the red cat. I've put my arguments in that email, so I won't labour them, but my view is that it's a service that primarily serves East Fremantle along a route that is quite well served by the Public Transport Authority. And I think the lack of, feedback that we've had in not reintroducing that route suggests that it is probably not being missed as much as, the Blue Cat, for example, would be. So my view is if you've reduced a service or removed a service and there's not a huge amount of community feedback telling you that you desperately need to bring it back, and you're in a tight budget environment, and you haven't really examined, and in my view, we haven't really examined the broader strategy around cat buses and what they're really sort of looking to do. And the adjoining local government's got zero interest in helping fund it, despite the fact that it appears to serve them equally as well, if not better than it serves us. There's absolutely no reason to fund that service. So I wouldn't rule out in the future a situation where we looked at maybe key destinations within Fremantle. I guess remembering that the cat bus was initially introduced many, many, many years ago as a tourism destination bus to get people to the chocolate factory in South Fremantle. And I wouldn't rule out in the future that we might look at that kind of service, but in terms of reintroducing the red cat at this stage, I don't support that. So I don't have to move that immediately if people want to talk more broadly about it, but I just wanted to flag that that's the direction that I would want to go.
Okay, I would like to respond directly to that, if I may use the privilege of chair. I don't know where you're getting the impression that the Red Cat primarily sends services East Fremantle residents. I've not heard that at all. And I guess if you came to the Freo Arts Centre precinct meetings, you would hear some of the upset at the loss of that cat bus and so on. And certainly Councillor Lang and I have heard numerous times, and each time we go, they are asking when it's coming back. I'll also say that the Maritime Museum gets a lot of people who are elderly and disabled and so on, and they complain and lament the loss of the cat bus. I spoke to Franco from the port last night when he was here as part of the chamber, and I asked what the port's view was with their strategy to activate Victoria Quay, and he said absolutely, they really want that cat bus back. I said, you know, enough to pay for it, and he said that he would be very happy to work, and the chamber as well would be happy to back us in approaching other parts of the state government, so tourism, for example, or whether or not it's Department of Transport more generally, or the ports, in order to chip in towards the cost of it, because I do think it actually is a really important tourism service, and it does actually go to all the major destinations. And certainly when I was being a visitor centre volunteer ambassador, a lot of people we were directing a lot of people to get on the Red Cat bus so that they could go to places like the Fremantle Arts Centre or the Leisure Centre, and yeah, the Victoria Quay and so on. So I do think, you know, it's interesting, this research and feedback that's come back is really useful. But of course, we need to remember that that's in the context of this is only research and feedback into the blue cat, because there was no red cat to actually ask people. And of course, it was in a time of COVID with borders closed and much less tourism and so on. So while this information is really useful, it's not comprehensive or it doesn't have any insight into the full service that once was. So any further discussion or debate? Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you. This is the main reason why I came tonight. Obviously, we're in a position of a fair degree of challenge because, you know, cat buses have their place, but over the last 2 years, the principal purposes for cats that applied to Fremantle have been particularly challenged. Obviously, university students, tourism, and just the general movement of people has certainly made you question that if the last 2 years was going to be the next 10 years, would you put in place a cat bus? Probably not, if you were doing it from scratch. The flip side of the dilemma is we have a CAT system. It has been well received and well utilised, certainly the blue, maybe not so the red. But the difficulty of sort of scrapping it would be, yes, it has its place, and maybe it feels like it's belatedly premature, if I can use that terminology. It's premature right now to have one, almost. It was appropriate before. It will be again. So if you scrap it, do we ever get it back? It's so hard to get in governments, it seems, to put in place something that's so logical. I worry about scrapping it and then never getting it back when we really need it. I had a number of questions that sort of went to, I guess, not so much what was in the report, but what wasn't in the report. And the first one is the special area rate conversation. And I kind of like wanted to know, and I don't know whether this has been answered before and I just can't remember, but why have we looked only at a special area rate as opposed to a special area charge? And by that I mean a rate is something that you rate against the GRV, and so it's going to vary for every household, as opposed to a charge, which is like the rubbish charges that some councils impose, and a lot of them just have a fixed rate per household. I know certainly over East that's almost standard. So I wondered why the conversation was, it just felt like it was so overly complicated. Instead of saying, you just do a special area charge for all those places that are roughly within 400 metres, and it's, based on the current calculation, it's 65% of 56% of the total cost. $243,000 a year is what you need to raise from that. So it's $35 per household. Why can't it be as simple as that? And so the question that follows from that is that actually something that we are allowed to do? As you know, is a special area charge something we can do under the Act as well as a special area rate? My sense is it should be, but if it's not, then that answers that question. I'll do all of the conversation and then ask for some response. I also, and it's picking up what you said, Councillor Pemberton, that we keep going to the PTA and the PTA keep coming back and saying, well, no one else gets more than a third or 40% or whatever. Why are you special? Well, that's just using a different lens. Everybody else gets, no one else is paying more than 1/3 of the cost of a cat bus. No other local government is paying more than 1/3 of the cost of a cat bus, as far as I understand. So I would like the starting point of the negotiation to be, first of all, focused on the whole of government, not just PTA. And second of all, setting a threshold of saying we're not prepared to pay more than 1/3, because that's kind of like the industry standard, and it does seem pretty reasonable. So I don't have words to change the recommendation, but I certainly flagged that that's where we should be heading, and I wanted to sort of see whether there was officer feedback and whether, in fact, that's something that they could draft for full council. The other thing I wanted to say is that, and I said it in my email, is that we probably do need to recognise that the sort of, I guess, the transport thinking hiatus that we're in right now shouldn't stop us from imagining and actually advocating for the fact that cat buses into the future are going to be really, really important. And even if we get rapid transit in the corridors that we've been asking for, such as to the south and to the east, all that's really going to do is pretty much mean the blue cat doesn't need to be there. But what it's not going to do is connect us to a bunch of other really important nodes and really important activity locations, such as what happens when the bridge gets redeveloped and we get hopefully an amazing East Street foreshore that's connected to Cantonment Hill. How do we connect into the heart of Beaconsfield and the Knutsford Street area? None of those areas are well served or well connected or well interconnected by public transport. So if you wanted to go from one to the next, you'd be struggling. And yet all of those things, Victoria Quay, the Maritime Museum, the hospital, the prison, they all are areas that probably ought to be interconnected by a CAT bus system. So we should be going to government saying we want to keep the principle of the CATs working, but we also envisage a future version of CATs which will be probably even more important to the future of Fremantle than the CATs have been in the past. And I just wonder whether that's a conversation that we should be, knowing how hard it is to get traction on any of these issues, we should be including that in our transport strategies, because rather than just focusing on rapid transit, I know, we're not getting very far, we're going backwards still on that, but we should also include the fact that the CAT bus in the right locations will be an integral part of our transport planning going forward. So with all those comments, I'll give it back to you.
Thank you. And in terms of answering some of the questions that Councillor Sullivan had, I'll hand to the Director.
I'll make a start, Chair. I'll probably need to look to the Acting CEO or Acting Director of City Business to answer the one about the difference between a special area rate and a special area charge. So Councillor Sullivan's first part of that question was why do we explore the special area rate? Just a reminder that this report is responding to further work that the council asked to be done when this was presented almost exactly 12 months ago. So the frame for the content of this report is very much set by that previous direction, previous resolution of council. That talked very particularly about a special area rate and investigations of a special area rate. Maybe as officers we interpreted that too literally, but that, for better or worse, that's the reason we focused on a special area rate in reporting back on this report. I'll perhaps let my colleagues want to answer the question about charge if Acting CEO looks like he knows the answer to that one.
Through the chair, I'm looking furiously through the Act to try and find where it says it exactly, but a service charge is what you're referring to. There are only 4 or 5 things that we can charge a service charge for, and it's things like television retransmission, bushfire, a couple of those sorts of things, underground power, so we can't actually charge a service charge generally or make something up. It's actually prescribed.
All right, useful. Councillor Vucic.
Look, I concur with Councillor Sullivan. He's put up a good case. I could not support a reduction of a vital community service. I'm very optimistic that tourism is going to come back. We've got a lot of B&Bs in the South Fremantle and Fremantle area. I think we're going to see things are going to get busier. I'm an optimist. I think anything short of that full service I couldn't support, because there are community people who are giving feedback that the 20-minute wait is not conducive to the school children. So I'm always been a fan of the full service. I think we do have a challenge of finding how we're going to pay for it. I'm not inconsiderate on that issue, but I think that's a separate issue. If we can't raise money through the Local Government Act, then we need to be creative in some other ways and concentrate on finding ways of retaining our basic services. I think even last night, Councillor Sullivan, I'm sorry, I'm sort of referring to you tonight, I didn't mean to, but he does say when we are doing problem solving that we often get stuck onto one particular problem, and we miss out Plan B and Plan C and Plan D, which ought to be running concurrently. So if one strategy doesn't work, we don't have a lag period where we are looking at other ways of solving a problem. So I think this problem fits into that. I would much rather that our energy goes into seeing how we can raise that money rather than reducing this vital service.
Thank you. Councillor Kamara.
Thank you, Councillor Pemberton. I just wanted to briefly express that I also support the officer's recommendation. I believe that it is something that's very useful to the community, and obviously in the longer term, when we do get our tourists back and everything's up and running again, it'd be really sad if this structure that we've got in place, that if we threw it away now, basically throwing the baby away with the bathwater, I suppose. And it is something that we can build on into the future. That southern corridor is really important, and I believe that eventually it will be replaced by something that reaches even further south, and will be so crucial to the growth of Fremantle and the vibrance. Just my final note here. I can't even read my own notes. And basically my final point was, I agree that we should be looking to get a better deal along that 1/3 principle. And if there's something that if this goes to full council, and it gives us time to work out a strategy that will get us towards that point. Thank you.
Councillor Moughlin.
Thank you. I suppose just to start, wanted to thank staff for the work that they've done in what is, an ongoing difficult discussion and conversation, and looking back at the resolution from 2021, or pretty much 12 months ago on council, that we maybe didn't give staff the best opportunity to do to provide that outcome that we were seeking through this review. And in particular, when we look at those strategic objectives which are listed, they looked more like a shopping list of things that we would like to see the CAT achieve, rather than being really clear about what is the strategic objective of the CAT. And it kind of strikes me as well that, maybe going back to that conversation around the parking aspect, is that the CATs most probably have different services in different areas and different objectives to what they're seeking to service. And even thinking about the South Fremantle or the South Terrace run, that equally is serviced by reasonable existing public transport services. So I'd be kind of reluctant to say that we would get rid of the East Freo run and maintain the southern one, and be carrying a reasonable burden of cost associated with that when there are public transport services there. And I think we had the discussion previously that if we did pull the CAT from there, would Transperth look at changing their routes and service times to pick up some of the slack? So to go back to, I suppose the point before is, if maybe we're a bit sharper on the objectives, then it may have helped the conversations that staff were having with seeking funding partners for the CAT. And I like the notion that Councillor Sullivan has put forward in regards to saying, 33% is the line that we want to start with, and align ourselves with others. And it may not be the Public Transport Authority that are stumping up the rest of the funding, but who else in government or other funding bodies would be keen to come on board as part of that. I suppose, maybe if we were just to go to that point as well around the longer term strategic element. What I note in here that we talk to this being for the agreement that we're looking to have is no less than 5 years. And what I would really like to be able to see is that what we're pushing for is those other strategic transport elements, whether it's the trackless trams or others, and be having those conversations to talk about transport holistically, and do that in parallel with maintaining the CAT service, which is a valuable service at the moment, but would like to make sure that we're really clear with those people that we're speaking about how we could look at additional funding. But acknowledge the challenges that existed with the objectives that we set.
So Mayor Fitzharding, are you moving your amendment?
No, I'm not, because I think what I've noticed is I'm informing what I'm thinking about with this, referring heavily to the CAT review that was done in 2021, January 2021, and I've noticed it's probably not in the additional documents. or anywhere in this item for elected members. And given that a number of our elected members weren't on council in January 2021, I suspect in order for us to have this debate properly, it's going to be really useful for that to be one of the documents that's there for reference, because it does give boarding numbers, it gives existing PTA routes and all the mapping 400 metres from each, street, basically, who's served and who's not. And I think it's really hard probably to have this discussion without everyone having equal context. So my suggestion is that for full council has that review and even the opportunity for people to come and have a briefing or a discussion on it prior to full council if they were to want it, because I mean there is a lot of data. What's in this report is some data that's very specific to a very non-representative time, and it means that we're not really considering the full set of information.
Okay.
So no, I'm not going to move anything.
Officers can take that on board without an amendment. All right. So I have flagged an amendment, and I'm kind of in two minds about it. I do note that I've mentioned the special area rate, but I would agree that I'm not wedded to that as a concept unless that's the only mechanism possible. And I do think that maybe it might change between now and council, but maybe to give council some kind of direction of where the committee is going with this, I will move my amendment. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Moughlin, thank you. So without rehashing what's in there, I guess it is just about recognising that both of the cats, the red and the blue, do service the local community a lot, and that it does make sense for that community to contribute a little extra to the running cost. And I note that the amount referenced in the report was just $9 per household, and I thought that's a bargain. And I don't think it's an amount that people would complain too much about. Also, the paid parking on Marine Terrace and Ord Street, we've talked about that for some time in relation to a number of different aspects, but I do think it makes sense to potentially link it to the cat bus service, because the cat bus is a beneficiary to the people who choose to park in those locations, so therefore they are actually contributing to it. And I guess particularly those people who are coming from outside of the Fremantle city area, i.e. they don't pay any rates, at least that way they will actually be contributing to the cost of the cat bus that they are using. While the advertising on board is, a little bit uncertain at this stage, I do also think, based on my conversation last night with Franco at the port, there's a fourth element there that is about approaching other sectors of state government to contribute towards the cost. Whether or not we get to the third, I don't know, but to start a conversation and to work collaboratively with some of the local businesses, the Chamber of Commerce and so on, to be putting the case as to why we should get some tourism funding to be able to run the cat, particularly the red cat perhaps. But yeah, that should also be an element which I might find a way to work in for full council. Any comments on the amendment? Councillor Moughlin.
Sorry, yeah. Just a question in regards to the $9. Was that just for one cat? Like I thought the other was, yeah. Well, 20, yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Was it just that question?
That question, and yeah, I suppose, yeah, to your point as well about the additional element to this in regards to other funding streams from state government. And yeah, we went and, staff went and had those conversations with other local governments and the like about funding, and yeah, we didn't pick that up earlier. That it should be more so some of those state government elements and be getting third-party advocacy as well to support us in this regard. So I'd be supportive of having an additional element around other state government entities or similar.
Yeah, absolutely. Do we want to add on the fly because this is it's part D, which is I don't know how it would be worded. I don't know whether it's worth doing on the run at the moment, but adding a D that says lobby state government departments such as tourism, and or should we just come back to it with a cleaner one at council? Yeah, okay. Mayor Fitzharding.
I guess one of the things that I'm wondering whether we should consider in this bucket of things is that, you know, the usage from the data that was collected in the COVID downtime shows it's about 50% local people using that service, well, the Blue service particularly. When we did the review in January 2021, we looked at the fair paying option. And because there is a high proportion of people who are using the service to get to public transport, I'm just wondering whether we want to put that on the list again too. So it is, you know, it's a 2-section or whatever fare, but if you're catching the train to Perth, which we know a lot of people do, they're paying that anyway as soon as they get on the train. And from the report in 2021, that said, well, that would basically cover the cost of the service. So PTA at the time weren't super keen on that, but I mean, that sounds like more of a leverage point than going off to tourism, who, you know, have no interest in funding buses. Than it does, you know, it sounds high probability to me that you would say to fund this service, because they already have 2 CAT services, the one at UWA and the one I think in Joondalup, that are fair paying CAT services. And I think the other thing I'd note with that is the evolution of how you pay for public transport, where, you know, you used to need cash or a smart rider. I think they're very quickly moving to a system where they sure as heck don't want your cash, and that tourists will be more able to pay by an FPOS type arrangement, so it doesn't become such a prohibitive issue when tourism comes back. So I'd be more interested in a D that said, you know, fair paying.
Yeah. Anybody further want to speak? Because otherwise I'll be closing.
Sorry, can I just have a question? Because just in regards to that fee paying element, can you clarify? Can the director clarify in regards to that? And if my memory was correct, PTA's reluctance was around the cost of putting in the infrastructure, was it? Or I just wanted to understand.
Through you, Chair, I might ask Mr. Giles, who's done a lot of the grunt work on this review, to help me out in a minute. I think in short, yes, that's my recollection. It was because obviously once you introduce a fare, the payment methods, you need the payment infrastructure installed on all the buses to deal with that. My recollection is that was a major part of the concern, but perhaps I'll just ask Mr. Giles to confirm that.
This is my first time using the microphone. Apologies. With our discussions with the PTA, the officers' opinion was because the city centre of Fremantle was well served by existing bus services, that a fee-paying introduction onto CAT services would be an additional fee service to the city centre, and they would see the funds from that. They would rather spend in an area which did not have any bus services. The Joondalup CAT is actually still a subsidised CAT, but that's still the third with PTA, City of Joondalup and ECU paying that.
Apologies, I meant the Rockingham and Subiaco.
Oh, yeah, sorry, Rockingham's fee paying. Yep.
The UWA CAT, Subi station to UWA.
All right. I think that that's probably another element worth including in an amendment for council, because noting that the way I've worded this, and quite deliberately, is as part of the budget process, we look at implementing the following. So it's not saying we are doing it, it's about let's investigate this further. We do want to pursue these things, because the report as it was written was indicating that these things were off the table, and I'm suggesting that maybe the council has an appetite to have these things on the table. So I've moved and we've got a seconder, so I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? Slowly. Unanimous. We got there. Thank you very much. As the item as amended. Any further comment? No. I'll put that. All those in favour? Those opposed? Councillor Vucic opposed. All right. So, yeah, this is going to council, so we will have a follow-up and we can refine that and other elements a little bit more between now and then, and also get that additional report. Thank you. So the other FPOL items that are council decisions, do people want to speak on each of those, or can we move things on block? Any items people want to speak to? The venue support, dedicated setbacks, or the tender on Port Beach? Parry Street, yep, 10. All right, so I'll move 9 and 11 on block. Can I have a seconder? Mayor Fitzharding. All those in favour? Unanimous. All right, and I'll move item 10. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Moughlin, thank you, and Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you. I just was really, I sort of looked through the report and I couldn't understand why we weren't talking about the rest of the footpath in front of the old Energy Museum. It doesn't really get covered in the report, and yet if I look at that footpath, which is to almost everybody's understanding is a public place, but even the on-road bike lane is partly in private land in that area. And, you know, having been through the High Street saga, it really worries me as to why that's not even been discussed in the report. If there's a logical reason, if it's because, well, it would cost us, you know, $300,000 to get that piece of land or whatever, then fair enough. But I'd still expect it to be in the report or a confidential report, because it just kind of like the elephant in the room is huge. You know, so I guess I'm asking why isn't the rest of that footpath identified? And I had a number of questions as to, you know, that bit of land that's been sold by the state government, and we didn't get an opportunity to get the footpath as a public reserve. It's been redeveloped, and we didn't get an opportunity to get the footpath. It's been subdivided. It's now 2 blocks when it used to be 1, and we didn't get an opportunity to get the footpath. So there seems to have been a whole number of threshold changes, and I'm really worried that we're going to be left regretting something further down the track if a particular owner grabs that site and says, that's my land.
Do officers want to respond at all? I'll hand to the acting mayor. CEO.
I've just been promoted. Through the chair, at the moment, these are the only properties we have control over, which is why we're taking action on them. The property that you referred to is privately owned at the moment, and we are just taking some advice on how we might approach that.
Do we actually own that little truncation? Is that so? The bit of land that's the tiny little bit that's right up that sort of far end.
It's either owned or publicly dedicated, and we're making it into a road reserve.
Okay. Is there any further comment? No? And maybe we can get a bit of additional information for when that comes to council, perhaps, if necessary. Okay, I'll put the officer's recommendation. All those in favour? That's unanimous. They are all the items. Therefore, there's no motions of which previous notice has been given. There's no urgent business. There's no late items, and there's no confidential business, so I will declare the meeting closed.